Hello and welcome to another Capital Ideas. Our guest this week is Dr. Nancy O'Brien, Assistant Superintendent for the Norman Public Schools. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's been a while since you've been with us.
Well, it has, but time goes by so quickly it doesn't seem like it's been very long.
You keep moving so fast it's hard to catch
right,
it.
Right,
I thought we might, in our portion of the show this morning, talk about Central, reminisce about the good old days 20, 30 years ago, and then I know the kids have some very specific questions that are more recent nature. So let's see, you started out, you were a teacher, then you were an assistant principal, and then you were a curriculum coordinator, and then you were, as you are now, an assistant superintendent.
right.
And in the mix of all that, you were a wife and a mother, and therefore a patron of the Norman Public Schools as well as an employee
Right.
of the school. So you've had all different kinds of roles here in Norman over the past, let's say, 30 years. I don't want to age you too much here, but
30's generous.
30's generous.
Right.
Let's just start back to when you began teaching. What was education like?
Well, I began teaching, interestingly enough, at Norman High School in 1961. In 1960, I was a student teacher at Norman High School. So really the beginning of my career as an educator and as a classroom teacher was in Norman. And the early 60s were in Oklahoma sort of a continuation of the happy days. The 1950s were pretty close, and we had not begun to see the kinds of social changes that really sort of changed the face of our society in this country. We didn't have the mobility that we have now with families and students moving all the time. I had lots of kids in my classes who had always lived in Norman. The family structure was different. Divorce rate was lower. All of the social change that we saw in the mid and late 60s had not yet occurred. And in that sense, the societal problems had not occurred. It was pre-Vietnam with all of the student unrest in the universities. And so I look back on it and I think about the issues that teachers and students and parents face today with the social issues, and I think it was a very calm time. Now, adolescence was still adolescence. That did not change. People were still people. And there were conflicts and there were problems. But in many ways, it was a calmer, easier time. And I certainly think for classroom teachers, less of a challenge to deal with those societal problems.
But they were out there and things were happening. You were a social studies teacher.
Right.
And that's always the place, ideally, where you talk about the here and the now and what's going on
Right.
and how it relates to our lives. You were a classroom teacher, I'm assuming now, at the time that President Kennedy was assassinated,
Right.
at the time of Kent State,
Right.
at the time of the best and worst of the Vietnam War, so to speak. How'd you handle those things in the classroom?
Well, it was a very emotional time, really, for all of those events, but particularly I think back on the assassination of John Kennedy, and I was not in Norman then. I was teaching the 6th grade in Kansas City, Kansas, and at noon, one of the children who went home for lunch came back, and he said, I can see, his name was Arthur, and I can see his little face, and he said, he came running in, and he said, Mrs. O'Brien, they've shot the president. Now, Arthur was prone to exaggerate from time to time, so I thought, well, this is an unfortunate story that he's telling me. And then, of course, the announcement came over the loudspeaker at school, and the children, of course, were 6th graders, and they got very upset, and I couldn't believe it. And then there was those stunned days where the older children watched television with us, and we you know, what is happening? This can't be happening in America. And because I was with younger children, you know, I think things moved on past that more quickly than if I had been with juniors and sophomores and juniors and seniors. But it was a really hard time. It was a shock. And then I think the aftershock went on really for years in our society.
Mm-hmm. I think in some ways we're still
Dealing
bouncing
with it.
around a little bit.
This could not happen to us. We thought, I thought naively that we were insulated from that kind of thing in our country.
Yeah. When you came back to Norman, did you go into Central?
No, when I came back to Norman High School. And I taught part-time because by then I had small children. And I taught part-time at Norman High School for several years, and I was involved in an alternative program for students who were having lots of difficulty, and we had a large federal grant for 3 years, and I administered that grant. And then I had my third child, my youngest son, and I stayed home again for a couple of years, and then I went to Central in 1975.
As a teacher or as an administrator?
As an assistant principal.
Okay, and how is being an assistant principal, or even any administrator for that matter, different from being a classroom teacher? What changes?
Well, you have a different set of responsibilities. You know, administration is a lot about taking care of planning and organizing sort of the structure of school so that teachers can do their work, scheduling, buying materials, trying to keep things coordinated so life makes as much sense as possible. I think personally for me it was seeing the big picture of the school rather than the picture of my classroom and just my department. And of course Norman High School was large, and there were lots of us in the social studies department, which was my teaching area. And so I thought I had a really broad vision of what the school was. And then when I was an assistant principal, I'm seeing the math department, all the departments, all the teachers, all the dynamics, and I can suddenly see really there's some people here who don't necessarily share the same opinions as those of us in social studies had shared. And that was a revelation to me. And, you know, you deal with some issues that as a classroom teacher you didn't deal with, the broad variety of parental concerns that come in and all of those kinds of
Now,
things.
you would have gone to Central at about the time it changed into a 9-10 center.
Right.
Okay. Tell us about it.
Well, it was interesting because I had been at Norman High School when the 10th grade was at Norman High, and the 9th grade was in junior high, and we had no middle schools. So that transition, I'm on the second transition. This is one of the reasons that I look a little frayed here.
You've been there and done that.
I've been there and done that once before, as have some other people who've been in our district a long time. But we moved the 10th grade to the mid-high and moved the 9th grade from the junior highs. And that had happened, it actually had happened in '73, as I recall, and so it had been a couple of years. And it was a trauma. It was done for lots of reasons. Primarily, we were growing, and we had a commitment to the middle school philosophy, and so those early years were how to manage the curriculum, and the mid-highs had the issue of really having to offer most of the required courses, and the 11-12 school had most of the electives. That changed the dynamics of who needed to be where in terms of the staff, and there were some high school teachers who went to the mid-highs. There were some junior high teachers who came to the mid-highs. And so it took a couple of years for the staff to mesh. But again, students were still students. And after the change was made, within a couple of years, all of us at Central felt like we'd always been together, that we'd always be together. And I never even envisioned in 1976, 77 being anywhere other than Central.
What makes Central special?
Well, I think Central has a long history as a school. It wasn't always Central Mid-High, but it's one of Norman's oldest schools. And I think a sense of history gives you that, because I think there are people in the community who remember when this was the old high school, and remember when we were here. And that sense of history does that. And then I think at Central, when I was there, we felt like at our school we have a whole cross-section of the community here in our school, and a responsibility that every student has an opportunity, and I think we worked really hard at that. I think every faculty feels like they have a special bond, and I guess that the longevity of Central and all of the memories, and you could always talk to people who'd been there a long time ago, and people in the community, and that sort of gave me a special feeling about being at Central.
Now, I've heard stories. You have quite a reputation from Central. What's your fondest memory of Central?
Well, my fondest memories of Central, really, there are two sets of them, the students and the faculty, but we had a lot of fun on the faculty. And I think that, you know, I remember faculty meetings and departmental meetings, and while we were serious about what we were doing with instruction and for kids, I had a sense that we didn't take ourselves too seriously, that we could laugh. And, I will never forget in faculty meetings, excuse me, we'd start a faculty meeting and Walt Shaw would raise his hand and say, "I move adjournment."
Still does.
They still do that.
Yeah.
And we would say, "Walt, sit down. No one asked you for your..." and we had, I think, a casual interaction with each other. We were all on the same team, and that our job as administrators was to facilitate teaching and learning, and that teachers delivered instruction, and kids were there to go to school, and we had fun doing that for the most part. We had our traumas, but we had a sense that life's much easier if you can keep your focus on what's important.
No, I tease you about the stories, but those are the kinds of stories that you hear, the fun, the good times, the sharing, the camaraderie, and the pulling together for kids. What do you miss about being away from the classroom the most?
I miss that immediate feedback that a teacher gets when students learn, when they solve their personal problems that they've shared with you. The same kind of feedback we all need, that I think you're doing a good job. Students, if you care about students and you indicate that to them in the way you interact with them and work with them, then you have a relationship. When they know you care, they care back, and they're candid, and they say what they think, and there are very few hidden agendas, and I love that. And that's not the case once you really leave I still had it as an administrator in a school, because I used to go out in the hall when I needed just a good laugh. I'd go out in the hall and listen to some 9th grade conversations. And I don't have a chance to do that now, except when I'm in a school and then they don't know who I am, so it's different.
Okay, very good. We'll be back in just a moment with 2 students from Central Mid High School. Our student guests this week are Julian Lever and Amy Kuhnhart, and they're going to talk to you about the transition, the second one that you've been through. So
Right.
You're an expert on the subject. I think, Julian, you get to go first.
All right, my first question is, at the new high school, will there be transfers allowed? And if so, what will be the conditions for the transfers?
Well, that's a really good question, because the transfer policy has not been established. Last year, we had a Citizens Advisory Council, and those are parents and patrons from around the community who serve on a council to study issues, and they studied the boundary issues last year, and they made a recommendation to our Board of Education. And the Board of Education is the body elected by citizens in town who make policy, and the transfer issue would be a policy. So this year, the board asked the Citizens Advisory Council to study the transfer policy and to give them some options for short-term policy, in other words, maybe some things that we would do in the school district just for 1 year, and to study long-term options for the policy. And the Citizens Advisory Council has been doing that this year. They've had a set of public hearings. They're working on their recommendations. They will go back in November for another set of public hearings to listen to parents and students and citizens, and then they will make some recommendations to the Board of Education. And I believe the timeline on that transfer policy is, it's January or February, I think. And so after the first of the year, then students will know what the transfer options will be.
Right.
Okay. Will we continue to have off-campus lunches?
There are no plans to, you mean at the high schools?
At the high schools.
Right. There are no plans to close the campuses at the high school. And again, the Citizens Advisory Council, year before last, I think, that was a topic, the closed campus policy. It surfaces as an issue almost annually, because there are always those in the community, concerned parents usually, who believe that a closed campus is a safer environment for students. And so it was a topic that our Board of Education asked the citizens to study. And they spent a year looking at all of the pros and cons of the cost factors that would be involved in doing that, at student interest, at student maturity levels, and they determined that we were better served to have open campus at lunch. And it has not come up this year as an issue, and there are no plans. Now, you need to understand, again, that that could be a policy issue that could come before the Board of Education, and that could surface really at any time. But right now, if nothing changes between now and the time we open the schools, there will be open lunches at Norman High School and at Norman High School North.
Okay, will that be a problem with the freshmen and sophomores because they don't drive and there's no restaurants around Norman North?
Well, I don't know how much of a problem that will be. The plans to sort of enhance the food service program are going on with the Marriott Corporation. I think as at Central and West, there are a number of students who seem to be able to get rides either with older brothers and sisters or their moms come and pick them up and take a whole group to lunch. You know, I think that freshmen and sophomores will be faced with the same issues they are at Central and West. And of course, the proximity is going to be more of a problem at North. I would also speculate that it won't be long until developers have fast food places available out by that high school. You know, the McDonald's on Porter moved down to the corner of Robinson and Porter, much closer to North. And so we'll see how that all plays out.
Has the schedule been chosen for the new high school, and will it be a block schedule or a traditional schedule? And will both the schools have the same schedule?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, the schedule has been chosen. We had a committee of teachers, parents, and students working from last spring through the summer and this fall to look at the schedule. Of course, you know that Norman High School has had a block schedule for a couple of years. Administratively, our only concern really was that we have the same schedule, because for whatever transfers do occur, a student really can effectively go to school in a traditional schedule one place, transfer and go into a block schedule in another place. So as far as we were concerned in the central office, we felt like that the kind of schedule was really up to the teachers and the administrators in the school, but it needed to be the same. And so that committee studied, the high school already had block scheduling. The mid-high teachers did some studying. We had some meetings together. We had took a trip to Ardmore with some students and some teachers and looked at their schedule where they do have ninth grade in their schedule. And then the staff voted and made a recommendation to the superintendent's group, and the decision was made to have block scheduling at both schools.
Will both schools have the same opportunities of classes?
Yes, the intent of the Board of Education when the decision was made a long time ago to go to two high schools would be that they would be equitable. Now, that doesn't always mean every course would be duplicated in both schools, because a lot of that depends on student interest and teacher interest for course development. But there had to be the same opportunities. There have to be opportunities for advanced classes, for the arts. If you're having more than one comprehensive high school in a district, you need to have the same opportunities. And so our direction in the central office from the Board of Education is that whatever it is, it must be comparable and equitable, and those opportunities be there. So the plan is to duplicate our programs with the exception of a couple of classes that involve a huge investment in a facility. For instance, the studio will not be replicated at North. Media classes will be held at North, and the studio, in reality, although it's on Norman High's campus, is a district facility. And the vocational agriculture program has a large facility, a specialized facility, and at this point in time we don't plan to duplicate it at North, but students will be able to come here and take VOAG as they always have.
How will the fine arts programs be affected? For example, will there be a new auditorium for plays and concerts at Norman High North?
Norman High North will not open with a new auditorium, but we have a 3-year bond fund plan, and in that plan, and I've I don't remember whether it's 98 or 99, but in a couple of years we intend to build really a performing arts center at North that can be used really by the district and possibly even some community groups. One of the things that Norman is really short on is a place to have large presentations and fine arts productions. And so because an auditorium is very, very expensive, I mean, I was flabbergasted to find out how expensive an auditorium is with a fully operable stage to do plays and concerts. But it is on the drawing board for North.
Is it true that next year the Norman will only have one football team?
Yes, it is true, and that was really not by our design, but by the fact that in 6A sports in Oklahoma, football schedules on a 2-year cycle, and so that schedule had already been created in the state. And so if we had a football team at Norman High North next year, there'd be no one for them to play because the schedule's already been set 2 years in advance, and we just happened to hit that particular year. So next year there will be a football team only at Norman High, and then after that, North will have, and that doesn't affect the other sports. The other sports will be at North, but football fell into that 2-year cycle.
Now, are we only talking varsity football, or are we talking all levels of football?
I believe that we're talking all levels. It may not be exactly right. I'm not positive about that.
Okay.
Well, how will that affect the band and cheerleading since they will have two separate things and they need to be at the football games?
Right. That will all have to be worked out when we get faculty and staff assigned about how we'll share that, all of the other activities that go with the football team. And what we'll have to do is provide opportunities for both sets of students to be involved in that, and those plans are going to be made.
Was Norman North constructed to encourage cross-curriculum programs like TEAM? And if not, why not? And if so, what kinds of programs do you see being created?
The teachers in the district were all polled and surveyed about what kinds of facilities they wanted in the classrooms. And as a matter of fact, from Central, an interest in TEAM resulted at a room being constructed at North that would facilitate that. Now, the other side of that is that you can team almost in any environment. I was a team teacher with 2 other people in Norman High School's cafeteria at one point in time. Now, was that ideal? No. Did we do it? Yes. Did it work? Yes, because we were determined to make it work. So, yes, we've accommodated those kinds of possibilities, and frankly, personally, I'm hopeful that we'll have more and more of that kind of thing as time goes by, because I think when students see integration between subjects like English and social studies, that it makes much more sense than to have all those being taught in isolation. So we hope to have that continue, and I would hope that we're going to have more of it.
There's a program in Texas that integrates geography, English, and science, which is a real fascinating combination.
Right.
Okay, next year will the middle school kids ride the same buses as the kids in the 4-year high school?
Well, that is also a question I can't answer. I can speculate that yes, there will be some middle school students probably on buses. But one of the things that we're doing right now is that we're working on who is where students are and what school they'll go to. And we have a bus route computer system called Edulog, and you put students in by their addresses, and then this computer program runs routes for you, and they're working on that right now. So it really isn't all settled about who will be on what bus. One of the things that we do now is that we've separated our elementary students from our secondary students. And it would be nice if all levels could be separated, but that will be impacted by the number of buses and also the number of drivers. And right now we're having a terrible time with bus driver shortage. So I'm just hoping that next year I'm not picking you up and taking you to your school.
Or me.
Well, better you than me. I mean,
No,
after
no.
all.
Okay, here's your chance. You've been out of the classroom for a while. Now's your chance to talk to kids. And you've got a couple minutes, and thought maybe you might want to ask them a question, perhaps.
Well, I'd just like to ask both of you about sort of what are your concerns about going to a four-year high school, or what are your hopes for doing that as students?
Well, I'm glad that I'll be able to take any classes I want, no matter what it is, and I won't have to be bused to a different school for that. And also for the sports, I think it'd be good for a little competition in Norman to have for both high schools.
I think you're right.
And I'm going to Norman North, and I think it's a great advantage that we're getting a whole new, well, not a whole new facility, but all kinds of new equipment, and hopefully there'll be a computer lab, and just there'll be a real advantage in having all this new stuff.
Great. Well, I think you all have a real positive attitude about it. I think that we're really going to serve students more comprehensively than we have in the past by having the 9, 10, 11, 12 split. So it'll be nice, and I might even like to talk to you in another year and see how you're doing with that. And I've enjoyed being with you today, and we're lucky we have students like you in our school system and a teacher like Mrs. Bayhan.
Well, hopefully next year we'll be back, and we can have you back, and maybe we can have that conversation and see how things are going.
I'd love to do it.
And we'll be back next week with another Capital Ideas.